Hello, and welcome to POMA Does, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine for our patients, our members, and the communities we serve. Thanks for tuning in.
Today, POMA does clinical rotation prep. Third-year student Sophia Clevin and recent grad Dr. Matthew Bambino continue their conversation, providing tips and tricks for clinical rotations. Thanks for joining us.
When you tell your attendings that you're going to look up something or your attendings tell you to read up on something, what specific resources are you using to read up?
Again, each attending is different. I know on cardiology, my attending told me specifically to go up to the library and go read, this section in Braunwald. So Braunwald is this, the cardiology Bible. It's like 2,500 pages of just cardiology land. It's a lot, but it's actually very well written. So I will say, if you have any questions, go to Braunwald.
Good to know.
And it's very easy to read. But so that's what I would do whenever, because I know how he worked. He didn't spend a lot of time in the hospital because he had a clinic on his own. And so in the mornings, he would spend time with you. And then if there weren't many patients, he would tell you, hey, go read about left bundle branch blocks and we'll talk about it tomorrow. And so then for a large portion of the day, you were becoming an expert in left bundle branch blocks because you don't know what he's going to ask. And so you read as much and you try to make as much information or sense about it as possible. And then his biggest thing was not necessarily that he wanted you to regurgitate the entire section to him. He just wanted to see if you actually read and learned and if you developed questions, because then he would probe with questions. And he was fine if you didn't know the exact answer, but if he could tell that you were thinking that you read. If he could tell that you didn't read, that was a problem, because he said, hey, go read this, and then you just didn't. So now you look like a dum-dum. Or if you cheat. So I've seen some people, specifically with the same cardiologist, they had a little cheat sheet in front of them, if they were talking about pressors and, what receptors do they work on? And then he'd ask them a question, they'd look down. It was like, I think they had their computer open with like pencil and paper and like stuff written on it. And then they had the computer screen with that stuff on it too. And he was like offended by that. Because again, I understand the crutch of wanting to always write things down. And it's okay. I learn by doing. So if I'm taking notes, I'm taking notes and I'm learning that way. Like I've done that all throughout school. That's like whenever I was in med school, I had basically like my iPad opened up to OneNote and I would be taking notes in there while the lecture's going on, highlighting things. So I learned by doing. So I definitely understand writing things down. You have to put it in here somewhere. And so I know that's something that upset the attending. So whenever the attending doesn't tell you specifically, hey, go read Braunwald, I think a good place to start is always your own review books. That way you have a basic knowledge of, the material that you're at least expected to know for your test. So you make sure you get that basis covered. And then you can either ask the attending point blank, hey, what would be a great review source for me to study that you would approve of? I think that's a completely reasonable question to ask an attending. You can also ask the resident. A lot of times, at least at my hospital, a lot of LECOM students were then kept on to be like residents. So they also went through a lot of the stuff that I went through. I think that's very valuable because they know a little bit more about each attending, what they want, and they've been in my shoes. Not every hospital is like that. Sometimes you meet a resident who they're like, I never even rotated here to begin with. This is my second month of residency. I don't know anything. You probably know the hospital better than I do. And so I think asking the residents is a huge resource too. And then when in doubt, like you can always defer to Reddit and like asking questions like, hey, what's the best, textbook for internal medicine? And probably 9 times out of 10, someone will say Harrison's. Every subject of medicine has their best textbook or best 2, best 3. And again, I found it helpful to start small and then work up bigger. I wouldn't always run to the textbook and read 75 pages on left bundle branch blocks because that's not feasible. Some attendings may expect that from you, but just grunt a little bit and just do as best you can. So starting small and then building up, I think, helped me. So I always went to my review book and then went to the actual text for clarification or for more nuances.
As far as OMM goes, we are osteopathic students and we might be working with some osteopathic physicians. How did you see OMM and the tools you learned over your first 2 years play out on clinical rotations?
This is a great question, and I'm actually really glad you asked it because it plays in with one of your questions you asked earlier, is how can a third year be helpful? And OMM is an answer that I forgot to say. And you have time as a third year. A lot of OMM techniques take time. And so if you're with an osteopathic physician who's fine with having OMM done, they're fine supervising you, however the process is, you have time to do that, whereas they can then be writing the note or vice versa, whatever it may be. So I think that is one way that an osteopathic student can definitely contribute to the team. For me, I had OMM as one of my strong suits. Whether it be because I'm a strong person, because I'm a big guy for those who can't see me. So whether it be just because of that, or I actually have the skill and the technique, nobody will ever know. It's something that I enjoy doing. So like on my sports medicine rotation, the physician I was with, he did like probably 50% sports medicine, like non-op ortho, and about 50% of his practice was actually OMM. And very quickly, he would learn which students were good at OMM and kind of like cut you loose. He would develop that trust with you. He would know where your strengths are, and he would let you do a lot more. Again, I'm all about doing, like do one, teach one, like let me fly. And so that's how I would always approach OMM. It's something you can always think about and offer for any kind of treatment. So if you're in a family medicine clinic and somebody comes in with constipation, you know techniques to help relieve constipation. You can offer that with the attending, like, hey, what do you think about these OMM techniques? They may be like, man, I don't want to do that. Or like, hey, like that would be fine. Let's go get consent from the patient. Because you always want to explain what's happening, get your consent for any kind of procedure, risk benefits, explain it, and then get consent, and then you can do it. So that's how I always approach stuff. I did that a couple of times in family medicine clinic. I did HVLA. I know not everybody's comfortable with HVLA, and it all depends on your level of comfort. I know at LECOM here, we're trained. We get a whole breadth of all the techniques, which I really enjoyed. Whereas some schools I know will like concentrate more like just HVLA heavy, or they'll be like just the stills technique or whatever. I like having that wide, here's all the stuff, here's the basket of the net that you could choose from, and then choose whatever you really want. So I know most commonly I use soft tissue, muscle energy, and HVLA, typically in that order, because I like to loosen all the musculature up first and then do a crack if I need to. Because not everybody responds well to the cracks. I love being cracked personally, but yeah, it all depends. And then in the hospital, it's even more unique. So you have to, again, as a medical student, you have time to do this stuff. The residents don't have time, and the attendings definitely don't have time, unless you have an OMM specialist. So I know that we have a consult service where one of our OMM specialists will come in and they'll do OMM. But it is also completely within our wheelhouse to do that too. It just comes down to like a level of time. Now, some of the hospital techniques you do, like I'm not as proficient in them. I can do them, but I know the OMM specialist, he's 10 times better. And so that's something I would do, because the hospital techniques, you're gentler, because I know we had a patient in the ICU that we just consulted on a couple weeks ago. And the OMM specialist came in and, he was doing a great job, helped, improve his pneumonia that the patient was dealing with. It was something that I wasn't comfortable doing because there's a vent on, there's all this stuff going on, all these tubes. I don't want to touch something and something go wrong, But yeah, I think definitely as an osteopathic student, you have OMM in your little doctor bag. It's another tool you have. Anything else, use it if you can. And I think that we're very benefited when it comes to a physical exam. I know I was very comfortable with physical exams, starting third year. I didn't know everything, but I wasn't afraid to touch a patient. I've seen some medical students who are not osteopathic that you can clearly, like, they're going to like examine the knee and their hands are shaking all over the place because they're just so nervous. It's a knee, dude. What are you doing? Just talk to the patient and examine their knee. So yeah, don't be afraid to really play into your strengths on your clinical rotations. I think my strengths, physical exam, osteopathic background, like I played into that stuff full tilt bogey.
And when you had MDs instead of DOs, were you still practicing a little bit of your OMM techniques or not as much because you didn't have someone who could supervise you that had a license? And also there might be some bias there still.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I did not have a tremendous amount of experience with MDs overseeing me. I guess surgeries I did, but most surgeries you're not doing. Because like if you're with an MD and you have a post-surgical patient and you want to do like a lymphatic pump on them, like the MD has absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So it's almost not worth broaching the subject unless you see a real clinical reason that you should be doing this. And then you can explain and, maybe get a DO surgeon or like your DO, I am attending to supervise you, anything like that. I think if you're comfortable having the conversation, by all means do it. I wouldn't just be doing OMM on patients just to do OMM if you don't really see a clinical need for it, just like any kind of medical procedure. So whenever I was exposed to MDs, that's kind of was my background. Now, whenever I was interviewing for programs, it was very important to me, since I have an OMM strength, to go to a program that is, I don't want to say largely osteopathic, but it is largely osteopathic, I guess is just the simplest way of saying it. That was important to me because that's a training I wanted. Regardless if I was going into orthopedic surgery, because there's still a lot of old DO orthopedic surgery residencies. Since the merger, that's actually a strength of the surgical field. The pot's all mixed. There's all these programs, but there actually is still a large chunk of DO orthopedic surgery accepting residencies. And like DOs make up the vast majority of their residents. So even if I was going into that field, I still wanted to do that. I didn't want to go to an MD heavy one because I didn't want to deal with that stigma if it was still prevalent. Now, in certain specialties like FM, it's not really prevalent, but in the surgical specialties, it is. And it's just a reality that us newly entering, DO physicians, we have to help dismantle this so that by the time, our kids or the kids after them come up, there's just no stigma. It's just everything's one, because that's how it should be, in my opinion. But that's how I kind of approached OMM dealing with an MD. If you really think it's warranted, you can have that conversation. You can explain a technique. Because again, as a student, you should be supervised doing it. You shouldn't just go in and start doing things to patients and, willy-nilly and then hurt somebody, God forbid. But yeah, it's use your intuition on, hey, can I approach this with this surgeon, or can I approach this with this, I am doc. Just read the room, I guess is what I'm getting at too. Very useful as a student to read the room. Don't be rounding on a patient and have some off the wall question that you ask in front of the patient. That's like an awkward question to begin. Like, don't ask the question there. Just read the room, dude. But yeah, that's how I approached it.
Awesome. That's really helpful. And then I don't know how LECOM does it. If you guys do it as pass, high pass honors, or what your grading system is for your clinical rotations. But was there anything that you did either on purpose or by accident, and maybe you got that highest honors and you were like, oh, that's the code right there on how to get your honors? Is there any advice there?
Absolutely. So we're old school. We still do actual numerical grading. I hope they get rid of it. Just because I can't remember the statistic, but I think there's only a handful of medical schools, and I mean a handful, like maybe 10, that still use a numerical grading system. All the other ones are pass-fail or high-pass, like whatever. I'm hoping they move to that just so that way across medical schools, it's all even. So after each clinical rotation, we have an evaluation form that we get filled out by the attending. And they go through, have check boxes, what you succeed in. And they have two areas, one for formative comments that can go in your dean's letter, and then one for it's just your own, your own comments. So if they said, hey, your tie was always crooked every time you came, like they could put it in there and go in your dean's letter. It's just for you to see so that you can correct things. Almost always what I got written in those is like, just continue to read and learn, like something generic like that, because unless you do something blatantly obvious that offends a physician, they don't really have much to say in there as long as you're being a good student. So how to be a good student? I kind of touched on this earlier. I think the secret to success, if you will, is just be present, be willing to learn, and be hardworking and be willing to help. Just, again, be there and just let me help you. If I approached every rotation as, here I am, I have to be here, okay? So whether or not you want to be there, you have to be there, okay? So just gird up your loins, get over it, you have to be there, okay? Since you're there, you might as well be helpful, and you might as well try to learn something too. Like, it's really simple. I've seen students not do that, and I'm just like, why are you shooting yourself in the foot? Like, why are you just not showing up to rotation? It's something that can happen after match. Fourth year is just like, I don't have to go to rotations anymore. You still do. I approached it. I have here these 3 months that I can help prepare me better for residency. If so, for family medicine, your IM rotations are daunting because a lot of people don't choose family medicine to go into and do hospitalist medicine. And so it's a different ball game compared to like clinic. It's much faster paced. The acuity is higher. And so something I did, which not everybody does, but what I thought helped me personally was I purposely scheduled 2 blocks of IM so that I could get the technical things out of the way for my first couple months of residency, because I'm going to be at this hospital. And so I want to learn the technical stuff. How do I do this? Hey, resident A, can you go through doing an admission with me? That way, it's not the first time I'm seeing it. And then, hey, do you mind? Can you sit next to me while I do the admission and while I do all the clicking? See one, do one, teach one. So that's how I did it. And I recommend that to anybody because it helps get things moving whenever you're getting ready for residency, if you have that ability, and really start taking on. Let me take on a little bit more as a soon-to-be resident. Let me see if I can handle a couple more patients. Let me continually test yourself to keep pushing your boundaries. So that way, I want to hit July 1 with my feet on the ground, running stable, like I'm ready to go. Because then, like, you're finally making decisions. You're responsible for those decisions. You have things that you have to do. Whereas a medical student, you don't have to do anything really. And so you can make mistakes as the medical student. You don't want to be making mistakes as a resident. You will make mistakes as a resident, but you want to make less. And that's the whole thing. You want to keep getting up better and better, making less and less mistakes, and just being efficient. So again, getting back to just be present, just be willing to learn, be willing to help out. How can I make Dr. So-and-so's day a little easier? If you have something that you guys can bond over, if you both like to fish, talk about fishing. Like, you can take things on a little bit more of a personal level. You don't have to just be like doctor, student, sit there, completely just reading a book. Like, talk to the people. And I think as osteopathic students and physicians, that's a strength of ours. I think across the board, we're a little better at talking to people. Again, I'm biased, but that's been my experience. We're just, a little bit more comfortable talking with people, talking with patients. It's not hard. It's just a conversation. So that's what I would say. Just try to be a good person throughout the process. I guess kind of circling too, your strength is not talking to people. If that's just not who you are, don't feel like you have to push yourself to do that. Like, don't be fake. Just be who you are. The one thing it's not okay to be is, rude. Don't be rude to people. The typical stuff that aren't socially acceptable. Don't be those things. Don't put people down. Always be willing to be the cliche, I guess, build people up, because we're going to this field to be a team player, to really be actually a leader too. Learn how to be a leader. You'll see attendings that you jive with better and really absorb that time with them. Because I've seen we have 12 rotations each year, so 24 rotations total. Let's just say, let's just assume I've been with 24 different attendings. I have little things I've taken from each attending that I incorporate into my own soon-to-be practice that I'm doing. Whether it be a quick and dirty OMM technique that I've seen one attending do, and then just how this one attending always asks these questions, or, their approach to a patient. I'm like this hodgepodge of these 24 attendings. And then you have your own stuff that you find works well for you. Then you add the residents in there too. And, I liked what this resident, I liked what, that's kind of what I've determined throughout clinical rotations, and also just kind of like this hodgepodge of all the experiences and people that we've interacted with, and then what we like in them. That's how we make our own developing, budding practice. So yeah, just be a good student.
Easy, right?
Yeah.
I just had a few more questions, more so focusing on the extracurricular aspect of things, because obviously our clinical rotations, they're part of our third year, but they're not everything that makes us. So did you find yourself still trying to check those boxes for like your residency applications? Things like, did you have time to volunteer? Did you have time to have certain leadership roles? How did that kind of play out for you?
Yeah. So I think definitely starting third year, I think it was June of third year. I can't remember specifically, but I know we got like our token for our ERAS. And so like we couldn't start putting things in, but we could just look, like we could observe. I think that was third year. I may be wrong. The reason I'm bringing it up is you can at least see how the application's formatted and like how you can do your experiences. And so for your experiences section, you get 10 total experiences that you can use, up to 10. And then you also have, I forget what they're called, but they're almost like labels for your experience. So you can have like, let's say like volunteer, it's like hobbies and like extracurricular, or like leadership. And, it's the same thing that we did for whenever we were applying to med school. You have this research and scientific reasoning section, and you can tie an experience to that. So what you want to do optimally is you have 10 experiences, and each one of those experiences is directly tied to one of those 10 things. So you're using all the 10 categories and all 10 experiences, and they all line up. So you shouldn't be duplicating unless there's a real reason to duplicate. If you've never published anything in your life and it's a research thing, don't try to make something up. Don't lie. And so you may then have a double of something else and just take a little bit of a different twist on it, or be writing with a purpose on why did you double up on this. Why I'm telling you that is entering your third year, you should have a pretty good idea of, where your strengths are. You have publications, you have research presentations, whatever the clinical reasoning, like all that kind of stuff. And you have your weaknesses and what do I need to make better? So if it is research that you have to do better, so get involved in a research opportunity with a resident. The easiest way to do that is either do a review on a topic, or if you get an interesting case study, basically clear with the resident, you do all of the work, write up the summary, do all of that, and then take to the resident. Say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, I had this idea. Remember, a couple months ago, we talked about, how did COVID impact, the recovery of total knees? Here, I already did the work. It's probably crappy because it's just a med student who did this entire research thing. Like, there's going to be problems with it, but the bones are there. And so, hey, what do you think about this? That's probably the easiest way to get involved in research, because then the resident doesn't have to do much work. They can maybe correct some stuff, give you some direction, you go and you do it. And then, hey, here's the package, all nice and wrapped, and all you got to do is tie the bow. That's the easiest way, I think, to get involved in any kind of research as a third year, if that's something that you need. So you're on the lookout for things that you're deficient in for your application to make you a good candidate. So I know throughout second year, I think it was second year, maybe first year too, we had the opportunity to go give COVID vaccines. And so me and a buddy of mine, we absorbed a lot of that time just to do it so we could talk about it meaningfully. And that's not saying that I did 2,000 hours of giving vaccines. Like, no, I think mine was like 50-ish, something like that. Because you don't want to just do 2 hours and then say, oh, this was the most meaningful experience of my life. That doesn't make sense. So you have to have a little bit of weight with that stuff. But that's how I approach my extracurriculars, especially getting into third year. Because you'll find certain rotations absorb more time than others. So like I can take more time. Surgery can definitely take more time. Whereas like family medicine outpatient clinic, like you're like 9 to 5 then. So it's not as bad. You still have time to go work out. I was still a huge proponent of, full disclosure, I'm a Taurus. I like to joke about science, but Tauruses love self-care, and I'm a huge self-care person. So even throughout medical school, I always stopped my studying, somewhere around 8 o'clock, because then an hour or two remainder until I went to bed, like that was me time. I would watch a show. I would do something to take care of me. Something that I also do, I work out. So I try to work out a lot. It's harder on certain rotations, like those 2 months of IM I just got off of those. It was hard for me to keep up my workout regimen. It's still something I've got to work out or figure out. So whenever I start residency, I'm going to probably have to do morning workouts. But yeah, you can still get out and take care of yourself if you like working out, if you like to go fishing. Now, you can't spend 6 hours a day fishing, but, you can go out on the weekends, take care of yourself, and then watch a TV show, watch a movie, in the evening. Don't be afraid to take care of yourself. You got to stay sane, because you'll realize working in a hospital, you can get burned out and you can get jaded very quickly too. And so you kind of have to do a little self-reflection and say, hey, well, I need to take care of me. I'm getting too sassy here, because nobody wants to be around somebody who's super sassy. It gets old rather quickly. And so you got to take care of you too. That's something I did want to say. Still take care of you. You got a lot going on. Everybody knows that, but still keep yourself sane with whatever that is. If you like cooking, go cook.
Definitely an important reminder. They're all medical school, honestly, in the first 2 years. As far as you had talked about a little bit, and for case reports or like case studies on specific patients, how did you go about getting those published? You said that you could bring it to the resident. Did you ever bring it to your attending? What did that process look like?
Full disclosure, I never did a case report and got it published. I was fortunate before medical school. I worked in a lab, so I got a couple primary articles from that. I have a lot of poster presentations. I did some conference presentations too. So my research background was more solidified before getting into medical school. Now, I still did get involved in resident projects and some residencies. Regardless of what residency you go to, residents have to do at least one resident project, research project throughout their year there or their time there. That's an ACGME requirement. So every resident has to do research. Depending on the institution, I know at LECOM, they liked having the residents do a project each year. Unless it was like a longitudinal project, then you could like do it over 2 years. So for family medicine, it's a 3-year residency. You at least had to do 2 projects is what I'm kind of getting at. So every resident is doing a project. It's easy to get just, hey, what project you working on and like, how can you help out? Because you can do busy work. And whether it's a quality improvement project, you can create the questionnaire to give to attendings, to give to residents, and then gather the information. That's one easy way to get tied in for resident projects. The other way being the case studies. You kind of just look up how to write one. So like, don't force a case study. It's kind of really by chance. If you are on your like medicine rotation, you get this really interesting case that comes in that would lend itself to a case study. So that's kind of just, again, by chance that happens. If you don't know what you're doing, ask the resident for a little bit of help. Hey, I'd love to do a case study with this. Can you help me with the formatting? Hey, this is how you would go. And, kind of go from there, and you get a little bit of direction from them. I think you need an attending to sign off at some point on it because the attending's name goes on it. That's honestly not that hard because the attendings you'll find are just like, oh, great idea. And then that's the sign off. And then like they may read the finished product, but from that point on, they're really not too much involved in it because, again, they don't have time. And then doing like review, almost like review articles, I think it would be a similar format to the case study, like similar, I don't want to say format, like structure, but you'd have the resident be giving you corrections or whatnot as you're writing it. I guess it's similar in that way. It's a little easier to write the review. Again, I haven't done it since before medical school. You have to find like a need for the review in the literature. Like if there hasn't been a review article published on benzodiazepine tolerance in, like 5 years, I did benzo research before medical school. One hasn't been done in 5 years. Okay, well, there's something to review here. We need to catch things up now. So that's the other thing. I know in my first 2 years, some of the preclinical professors, that's what they did too. So depending on their area of expertise, they may be privy like, hey, I've been wanting to do a vitamin A review article for a while. Just nobody's really picked up. Hey, let me help you with that. That's one way to do it too. Again, starting clinical rotations, at least for us, we were more removed from the preclinical, but that's something that you can still be continuing despite your clinical rotations. If you have an established connection with your preclinical professors doing research, well, then you can continue doing that as long as it fits into your schedule. Now, if it's wet lab experience, I don't know how feasible that is because you're going to be in a hospital. But if it's like just doing review stuff, almost like consulting in a way, sure, you can continue that stuff. There's no problem with that. It depends on what field you want to go into. If you want to be doing neurosurgery, one, very hard for DOs to become neurosurgeons since the merger. I have a friend who wants to do neurosurgery, and he is just plugging research out left and right. He has this organization. Basically, it's all digital. He's somewhere on the board of it. He helped make it huge. But it's just like a research hub for all these review articles and, just kind of pumping them through a big assembly line. And so he's gotten a lot of research from that, but that's also demanded in his desired field. If you don't have over 25 publications and you want to do neurosurgery, don't even apply. Again, a lot of these are brushing generalization statements, so take them with a grain of salt. Any of the surgery ones tend to be a little heavier. I was always of the camp, it is quality over quantity for me. So if I have 4 projects or 4 papers, that may be not as many as 10, but I can talk very well about my 4 papers. And they were actually meaningful. I didn't just do them to do them. Every specialty is different. That was my personal view. And if a program didn't like that, oh, he doesn't meet our 10 paper threshold, well, then you probably don't want to go to that program anyways, because we're just philosophically not going to jive, dude. Like, you're way too academic. You will want numbers. I want to be more of a rural person. It's not as important to me doing research. I still like it. I still see its place. But in terms of where I wanted to go and where I want to future practice, I don't want to be in, New York City. I just don't. So that's the easiest way to apply or to go with research. Look at the specialty, see what the demands are, and then kind of try to make yourself fit that as best you can. So like family medicine, have some research, but it's not super important. I am pretty much the same. Gen Surg, you should have a little bit more. Ortho, you should have a little bit more, but again, it depends on specialty. So like the DO orthopedic programs, research was important, but it was more of a checkbox, at least to the ones I went to, because they were smaller programs. They weren't as academic. Now, if you go to the real big academic one that comes to mind, it's like Doctors Hospital in Columbus. I imagine, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine they probably want more research because I know that they're more of an academic center. That's just what's going to happen. So that's how I did research.
Yeah, no, that's helpful because I think there's a lot of different students interested in a bunch of different stuff that all come from different levels of where they're at with their research and if they even want to do it at all. But you were talking about how you had exams at LECOM at the end. We call them our COMATs. What were the general format of those? I don't know if it changes for each school. What were your general formats for those exams? And then were there specific resources you used that were really helpful?
Yeah, so I think the COMATs and the NBME shelf exams are pretty much the same, just the COMATs are the osteopathic version of them. The format is very similar to boards. So you all took level 1. Basically, the little shelf exams or the end of rotation exams are just a smaller version of them. I think, if I'm not mistaken, ours were like around maybe 100 questions, give or take. And I kind of just approached it the same way. So each rotation I did, I had a review book for that rotation. So like I'm staring right now at Step Up to Medicine. That's what I chose for my internal medicine. Again, you can look online on what people recommended because on like Reddit and all that kind of stuff, like everybody has their opinion on, what's the best book. And you can kind of get a consensus on what's good too. I know also for our rotation syllabi, we were required to choose a review book. And they had recommended in our syllabi which ones they would recommend. So I remember, I think for OB-GYN, it was the Blueprints one, I think, because there's a couple good. There's Step Up to Medicine, which is just general medicine. Then there's Blueprints, which you can get for each. There's a case study series that you could do too. And then there's Mastering the Boards, which is more general. First Aid also has subject specific ones. So like I would have a review book for each one that I did. And I actually have physical review books because I'm old school. I like physical. I don't like looking at the screen all the time.
I'm the same way, actually. Yeah.
And I feel like that's very prevalent in medicine. A lot of people still like old school books. And so that's what I used for making sure I at least covered the material. And then if I ever had questions on something, like I didn't understand heart failure, then I would go to a textbook for that, because then you have all the information in the textbook. Because something that you'll learn on clinical rotation is you have this random knowledge that you memorized for level 1, and you'll start making the connections your clinical years, and you'll start really understanding, oh, so that's why the edema is present in this specific patient. The pathophys, you'll really start making connections because you can now see the patient. At least that's how it was for me. Again, I'm a very visual learner. I learn by doing. And so I learned a lot on clinical rotations where I was very scattered preclinical, and then it all started coming together clinical because now I could see the patient, or now I have an example of what's going on. And so that's kind of what I did. Just look online, see what ones mesh for you. Each book has a different format. So if I remember correctly, the Blueprints series, they're more of like paragraph reading, whereas Step Up to Medicine is more bullet points. Kind of like First Aid's kind of like a hybrid between the two. So that's how I approached everything. And then you do questions. We had a question bank through, just making sure that you're doing subject-specific questions for that test. So if you're doing, again, internal medicine, we had like 700 questions to be doing. We did have requirements per week, what we had to accomplish. And so just sticking or keeping up with that, making sure that you're seeing this stuff. Because I think we used TrueLearn. That was required by us. A lot of students still had UWorld too, so they would do both. It's double the amount of work, but kind of can't argue with how many the success devoted to UWorld. I think something like 96% of medical students use it, so that means something. So yeah, doing the questions too. And then if you get things wrong and get things wrong consistently, you should probably either just review that stuff again or go to the text and really review it. Definitely depending on what the subject is. So if it's something like heart failure, you really need to know heart failure. You really need to know pneumonia. But if it's some off-the-wall thing and it's like you have 2 days until your test, maybe cut your losses. Be smart with your time. I'm not saying that stuff's not worth knowing, but depending on how much time you have, you have to use it efficiently. If you keep getting heart failure questions and you keep getting them right, well, then you probably don't need to go review it because you know it.
Yeah.
So that's how I approached.
That's helpful even for things like level 1 or level 2 and step 2, things like that. And that actually kind of leads me into my question, which is my last question about that. And it would be, were you able to set some time aside to do your level 2 and step 2 studying? Or did you feel like your POMATs along the way kind of prepared you for it and you didn't have to do as much dedicated time like you did for maybe step 1?
So I think the idea of having the post-rotation exams is you don't have to review as much whenever it comes to boards. So I had my internal med early in the year. And so by the time I got to boards, I had 9 months between the two. Did I know more internal medicine than I did whenever I started? Yes. But did I have to review all of internal medicine? Absolutely. Just because it wasn't fresh in my mind. So I was very fortunate. So we get one rotation throughout each year that is a vacation month. I was very fortunate. I don't know how I got it to work out, but my vacation month is May. And so I had May off last year, which I studied for my boards and then took boards like right at the end of May, beginning of June. I took level 1 and step 1, and then I only took level 2. And so the same thing, happened with level 2. I just studied for May and then I took it right in June. And then like right now, I'm technically on my vacation month now. It's rough because I did the entire year of rotations with no break, and then you finally get a break. It's a blessing and a curse. So that enabled me to do a little bit more dead time. Not everybody is fortunate like that, so you have to kind of stick with it. I think as you go through your clinical rotations, especially during getting through third year, you're going to be getting more comfortable with the material as a whole. So you'll be doing less and less reviewing and more questions, because there's only so many ways you can ask questions. And I think that's probably what's very valuable about doing a lot of questions, is you learn the ways they're going to ask things. You kind of learn what lends itself into certain questions. Certain diseases lend themselves to, asking just about diagnosis or asking more about the treatment or what's the next step, what's the next best step. Like certain things lend themselves to that. So you may pick up on some of that. But I know throughout getting ready for level 2, I was doing more and more questions because I had the basic knowledge base of things. And then, if you get the question wrong, you can, read through the explanations and all of that and see why things were wrong. And I don't always have to go back to a review material. Only starting out, you'll be going back to a review material because you won't remember things. You won't remember the pathophys. But at least seeing the patients, I started understanding pathophys a lot more. And so then I could make my own connections, so to say, and, this is why it's happening now. I didn't have to go read in a book and have the book tell me this is why it's happening. I could make the connection. So level 2, step 2, they're not fun. They stink. So I guess everybody already took level 1 and step 1. They're going on clinical rotations. If you haven't taken those yet, I would approach those as if they're scored. So my year was the first year where they no longer had the score. And I think they did the students a disservice personally, just because we weren't necessarily ready then to have the level 2, step 2 be scored, so we may have slacked a little bit for the first levels, and then we had nothing to gauge how exactly we were doing. You do have the COMATs, you do have the NBME shelf exams, you can do practice exams, but nothing really prepares you until you take that exam. So I think the best approach is always be taking those tests as if they're graded. Same thing with the COMATs, as if they really do matter. Try to be doing your best on them. And I think that'll set you up then for level 2 and step 2 to really be successful, because what programs have now done, I know what they were trying to do was take the pressure off of step 1, level 1, so that you can look at the applicant more holistically. That may have happened to some degree, but now they're using just the level 2, step 2 as the filtering criteria. So it could have just made both of them pass fail. That's my personal opinion, but it is what it is. And so as it stands right now, you have a pass fail on your first level of stuff, and then you have a score on your second level. So you just got to do the best that you know how and just work your tail off and try to just, again, be that sponge, absorb as much stuff as you can, especially third year. Third year is more academic. Fourth year is more doing. Now you're getting a little bit more autonomy, maybe, and you're doing a little bit more. You're going to see, hey, can I become a resident? Can I start making this next step? Whereas third year, you're getting used to the hospital. You're still learning stuff. You're still developing your clinical knowledge. Not that doesn't happen in fourth year. It still does, but you're going to be closer to a resident. So you're going to be functioning a little bit more like a resident. Whereas a third year, you're functioning like a preclinical student, like, you're a student.
Well, thank you, Matt. That was actually all the questions I have for you. That was a lot. Any other parting words of wisdom for us?
Just circling back, try to be that good student. If you picture in your mind what's a good student, just be that. Be willing to be present, be willing to help out, be hardworking. Across all residencies, that's what they want. And then each residency then takes it a step further. So in orthopedics, you want to know classifications and you want to start knowing stuff about bones. Whereas medicine, it's kind of more simple. Family medicine, it's also more simple. Hey, can I work with you for a couple of years? Are you a good person? That's a big filtering criteria for a lot of programs, is can I work with you? If they can't check that box, they're probably not going to move on with you because they have 3, 4, 5 years with you. Are you teachable? Be willing to learn. Don't lie. Just be honest. Like it sounds all cliche, but just be that. Be good. Be a good person. Be a good student. If you weren't attending, how would you want your student to be? And try to be that. Every attending's different. They all have little quirks that you'll figure out And the quicker you pick up on those quirks and how they like things, that makes you shine. But overall, I think that's a good blueprint for success on clinical rotations.
Amazing. Thanks again, Matt. I know this is going to help a lot of anxious incoming third years go into their rotations.
Look, guys.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts, and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.